Thank you for joining me today. This is Detox Your GIS Data. My name is Stacen Gross. I'm the territory manager with Geocom. Been in the business for about 27 years in public safety technology. I currently serve as the CCAM, which is Commercial Corporate Advisory member for both the Iowa and Nebraska APCO NENA chapters. Is your 911 and CAD mapping stressing you out? Have you lost faith in the accuracy of the location information your applications are giving you? Have you sought out other resources like Google or the maps on your mobile device while on the phone with the 911 caller? If your responders are using the same map, are they stressed out as well? These are all common problems that we hear all the time, unfortunately. The good news is that there is a way to remove this stress and help get this thing figured out. Have you said or heard this before? This software stinks, sucks. The map doesn't display at all. This is the wrong location. An address is completely not found. Many times the belief is that, hey, this is the software. Most times it's actually the GIS data. The software is simply reacting to the data. If the data doesn't know where the location is that came from 911, it's not going to know where to put the icon on the map to show you where to go. So it's fairly simple, but believe me, we have heard this before, and I'm sure that you have as well. You can't ignore the problem any longer. If your maps are a problem now, they're going to be an even bigger problem in the future as we transition to next generation 911, where your GIS data is going to be used to route those calls to your dispatch center. The good news is stress relief can be just 3 easy steps away: assess, improve, and maintain. Assess your GIS data. So this is the first step. Once you realize there's a problem and things just are not working right, assess your data. Take a step back, look at what is going on, figure out what is the problem and how do we fix the problem. Start by asking the question, who maintains your data? Sometimes you have a staff at the dispatch center that actually maintains that data. That's the ideal situation. If your emergency communication center has GIS folks on staff that are focused on your needs, that's wonderful. That's awesome. We rarely see that, unfortunately. But a lot of times you will use local municipal GIS staff, county GIS staff. They can be dedicated, they can be trained, they can have tools. Other times, maybe their focus isn't 911, maybe their focus is other things. In addition, maybe you have vendor partners that maintain your data for you that you reach out to when there's a problem. They have expertise, their practice, they probably do this. This is probably all they do for a lot of other customers. And a lot of times their staff has a variety of certifications, etc. One of the questions we hear from our customers is kind of those words over there in parentheses. You guys are taking care of this for us, right? That's kind of the thing that you want to hear. You want to know that there's somebody there that's going to help with these problems and that they can get resolved in a timely fashion. Synchronization is the key. So you've probably heard this before, but your ALI, your MSAG must match your GIS data because the information that's coming to you with a 911 call that you are processing, creating that CAD call for service, that information needs to match. So if the caller is calling from 101 Main Street, but for some reason your GIS data doesn't have a 101 Main Street, the map is just going to sit there, perhaps with a spinning wheel, perhaps with an error message, but it's not going to know what to do with that call because it doesn't exist as far as it's concerned. In addition, your GIS data must adhere to relevant standards and requirements. So when a lot of folks hear this, they think of, oh, that's these next gen standards and requirements. Well, not necessarily. Every software application out there has a format that it wants, a schema. It wants the GIS data to be structured a certain way so that it works properly in their applications. So again, your whoever maintains and builds your data needs to make sure that they're aware of those requirements and is adhering to them as best they can, because again, otherwise that's going to cause a problem with calls plotting, CAD recognizing the data, etc. So what's right and what's wrong? So that is the ultimate goal of this assess process, is to figure out what's right and what's wrong. It's kind of difficult for your GIS folks that maintain your data to, when you tell them, hey, this didn't work, that didn't work, they can just kind of randomly go to the data and start looking for errors, or they can utilize some tools to actually have a focus on where they go look at errors. So, kind of showing you an example here of an alley report that's basically checking the alley against the GIS data and generating an error report and a match rate. That can basically give your staff or your GIS maintenance partners a place to go look, a place to start fixing errors, and they can also utilize this process of reevaluating the data as they make updates to hopefully see, hey, where we started this out at 90%, we're now at 95%, we're making progress. So it lets them know that they're on the right path. Our experience, so generally speaking, we have seen hundreds of GIS data sets. We've compared hundreds of GIS, MSAG, and ALI, and generally speaking, we haven't seen anything that is just terrible. And I think that's a function of the fact that you've been using GIS in the 911 center for a number of years. To plot wireless calls is usually when folks started to use GIS data. Because you've been using it, you've been working on it, and it works fairly well in most cases, and that's kind of why we have that number there. About a 70% match rate is usually as low as we'll see if the data is being used to match or plot calls today. So that still means there's work to do. You want to get to as close as 100% as you can. So if you're at 70, you've got 30% of work to do. And in some cases, the GIS data might be good, but the MSAG might be bad. We've seen both of those situations where one is good, one is bad, and in some cases, both of them are just bad and they're both out of sync. The biggest thing is your staff must be able to communicate those issues to the maintenance team. And instead of back to my slide where, hey, this software just sucks, you need to be able to communicate that, well, it sucks because these roads are missing, these ranges of addresses don't appear. Give them some specifics. They'll appreciate that. Once you're done with the assessment phase, you can now begin to improve your data. You can begin working on those errors, getting things fixed up to hopefully reduce that stress, make things work better, etc. So what's next? Now that you know what is stressing you out with your maps, you can begin to remedy the situation and improve your data. There's kind of internal impacts and there's external impacts. Internal, it is staff availability. You may have some GIS folks that you utilize at the city or the county. Are they available? Do they have other projects going on? Will they be able to get to the things that you need to have fixed? Do you have vendor contracts? What do those contracts say about turnaround time for updates? Funding and budget. I have a slide coming up that talks about, if this is a big lift, if this is a big project, and you're really trying to synchronize your data, and you're one of those agencies that's at that 70% match rate, it might be a big lift, and you might need outside funding and a budget to get the project done. External impacts, regional coordination in other jurisdictions. Again, you're not an island in and of yourself. You are part of a larger effort, perhaps with a region or a state, etc. So you kind of need to realize what's going on around you. What kind of issues are your neighbors having? What things do you need to coordinate with them on boundaries, etc. And last, your software requirements. And I touched on this before that whatever applications you're using this data in, it's going to have requirements. It's going to need data to be a certain way. So you need to identify those up front to make sure that whatever is built and fixed up meets those requirements, etc. And as noted, their priorities. Set some priorities as to, what's the first step. If you could sort the errors into, critical errors, not so critical errors, so that you kind of have some steps to go through of what's the priority. Who has what you need? Does the city or county department use the same data that you're currently using? So road center lines, imagery, parcels. We've seen lots of data sets that are they're missing a few roads for whatever reason. They got lost along the way. Reach out to another agency that's using GIS data, maybe a road department, a utility department. Maybe they have some resources that you can use to help fix up your data, put in the missing parts that you're needing, etc., on and on, as well as imagery. One of the things we found is a lot of dispatch centers are using 10-plus-year-old imagery. So a caller, you pull up that nice aerial image. The caller is saying, "No, I'm at this new business off of Route 10," but your imagery just shows a field off of Route 10. So again, there's probably some other departments that have some updated imagery that can be added into the mix as a part of this project to hopefully make things more meaningful at the dispatch center when they are on the phone with the caller. Parcels. Parcels can be another good reference just to figure out, try to match who owns or who lives at that location to match that address point to the structure, etc. Identify other resources, cities, fire departments, counties, regional, state. There's just all kinds of GIS resources out there that can be brought to bear on your project to help you make sense of what's going on, help you come up with the resources that you need to fix things up in a timely fashion. Do you have the financial resources needed to make the improvements? So I touched on this before. Is it a heavy lift? Do you have a lot of work to do to get your data where it needs to be? Does your local staff have the availability and time to get at it? Do you need to bring in a vendor partner? And do you have funding? In different states, there's lots of different funding out there that's available, as well as funding that's kind of on the way in the mix, so to speak, that's coming to you. So there is funding out there to do these projects. You just need to look around a little bit for it, and you can also budget for it and plan for it if you need to. Common problems, polygon gaps is one of the problems, and this can kind of show you how that looks on a map where you have a gap in coverage. Basically, that zone 46 has a gap in it that probably needs to be covered, and this could be an emergency service zone, a municipal boundary, etc. And then you've got an area of overlap that really needs to be part of zone 45, but it's included into zone 46. These are very common problems that we see all the time, but they can really cause major issues when dispatching CAD call for services, especially because if this is a service provider, CAD is going to tell you the wrong service provider to send for an incident that's in that area of overlap. Other common problems, range overlap. So again, you can see in this example, there's two kind of highlighted light blue road segments that basically have the same address range on them and the same street name. So you can see that potentially you could have the same location in both of those, and they are quite a ways apart. Conversely, you've also got gaps. So you've got an address that you can see is out of sync, that 155. It is out of sync. It shows that there's a gap in the address ranging on that street. Again, just little things that an initial look at them really doesn't show this up until you start to do some testing on the data and looking at gaps and overlaps and seeing, oh gosh, there's where that is. Maybe you're fortunate and you've never had an issue where you've been dispatching and this has come up and you've noticed it, but it for sure is going to cause a problem at some point if it hasn't already. Address points, yay or nay? So we hear a lot of discussion about address points. I know we have a number of folks on staff that were on the NENA standards committees, and initially the standard kind of said that address points are kind of a good to have, not a required. The latest iteration is they are required, and most states that we're working in today are requiring address points to be in the data for Next Gen 911, as well as a lot of the CAD systems and software applications we work with do require address point data. It just makes the location more accurate. And I do have a slide that kind of shows this in a little bit of how the accuracy can be so much better with an exact match address point. Does your application require them? So I kind of noted pros. It improves the accuracy of the location, somewhat critical in a next-gen 911 environment, and cons, more work to maintain. Obviously, points, if you've got a multi-structure location such as an apartment complex, a shopping mall, it's going to have address points that are very more detailed, more things to work on, more things to keep track of. But the good news is once you do have the address point layer kind of built for your jurisdiction, it is fairly easy to maintain. It can be a big lift to get to that point, though, however. More address points. So spatial considerations. What we kind of just showed you is, are the points there? Are they in the right place? Attribute considerations. Are those addresses associated with the points correct? We found that in numerous situations where there's a whole bunch of points on the map. You zoom into those points and start to look at them, and the addresses that are tied to those points aren't in the right sync. They're not in the right spot. They could be as much as a mile off from where they're supposed to be. Somewhere over time they got placed there, but they really don't belong there. So a lot of those things can happen. And again, it's maybe no fault of anyone. Something happened along the way, and now you're dealing with the problem and it's stressing you out. But again, through this assessment process and the improved process, you can find those out, get those fixed up, make life better. Also, do the naming conventions match the current MSAG? And again, maybe the GIS is right, maybe the MSAG is wrong, maybe the MSAG is right, the GIS is wrong. Subaddress situations. So I alluded to this as well. Shopping malls, college campuses, apartment complexes, trailer parks, anything that maybe has one address to the location off of the traveled street, but has multiple sub-addresses inside of it. These are areas that are very tricky. A lot of times I say that, if you're a smaller, more rural jurisdiction and you don't have these situations, that's a good thing, because these situations do require extra work. Sometimes you have no other choice but to go out there and put eyes on some of these locations to figure out, where do these points actually fall? Where is the entrance into the business, so to speak, so you can put the point there? And standards. Some jurisdictions, as well as states for next gen, will have standards on the placement of the points on the rooftops, at the location of the door into the business, all kinds of different things that you kind of have to be aware of as you're building, fixing the data so that you make it right the first time. While you're at it, so that these are things that, if you're going to undertake a project to kind of clean things up, to declutter and detox your GIS data to make it work better, other things to consider. Consider transitioning to a GIS-based MSAG. You're going to need to do this at some point anyway. Maybe now's the time to go ahead and jump in with both feet and start working on this. And really, it's just making sure that your GIS and your MSAG are an exact match of each other. The MSEG doesn't necessarily go away. It just becomes part of or embedded into your GIS data. You're going to need this later, as I noted anyway, with the next gen 911 transition. A lot of times what we found is an MSEG was something that was built a long time ago. Maybe it's been maintained, maybe it hasn't. When a new street gets added, maybe you just kind of create an entry to act as a shell record in the MSEG for that street, but maybe the range on it really isn't right. Maybe you create a range of 100 to 1,000, and really the range only goes to 199, but you just put 1,000 or 999 because you really weren't sure when the road was built, that you thought, well, maybe they'll extend it. So stuff like that just over time can kind of go awry and create problems potentially. So just revisiting that from time to time and making sure that your MSAG and your GIS are one and the same is a very good process to follow. The greater good. Think about how your data fits into the big picture with surrounding jurisdictions. And I touched on this previously that, unfortunately, you are not an island. And unfortunately, well, hopefully, fortunately, your GIS data in your center doesn't stop at your boundary, because we all know that emergencies don't just stop at your municipal boundary, your county boundary, et cetera. They extend well beyond that, especially with wireless calls. You'll get a call outside your jurisdiction that maybe hits a cell tower in your jurisdiction, and now a caller is giving you location information that you don't even have on your map. So again, you want to coordinate with your neighbors, you want to have their data in your system, and you want to share your data with them, because it's all part of the greater good. Regional coordination. You're going to again want to do this at some point in the future with next gen 911 if you're not already. Maintain some level of coordination with your neighbors on the GIS aspect. We're working with a number of projects now where we're creating stitch points between jurisdictions so that when agencies want to refresh their out of county data, they can easily do that and get the data to match up by kind of matching stitch points in both counties' data. so that think of the data. I'll simplify it. Think of the data kind of as magnets, and you kind of put those puzzle pieces together, and they come together at the same point because those magnets attract each other, so to speak. So it's really just creating a way for the puzzle pieces to fit together, for your roads to match up, for the data to be routable between jurisdictions, et cetera. Because again, going back to 911 mapping and CAD system mapping, those systems will not work properly if that data is not kind of synchronized, edge matched, made routable between county data sets, et cetera. So there's a little bit of a process to make that happen, but I encourage you to go through the work and make that happen because, again, I reiterate, you emergencies don't stop at your boundaries. You don't want to have gray space outside your county that, maybe you're using your map for a backdrop for vehicle tracking. So your fire trucks don't just drop off the map when they leave your jurisdiction. So back to your GIS data improvement project. So success. You've now reached a data sync rate of 98%, maybe even more than 98%. You can kind of see that the handcuffs are off. Your stress is hopefully on its way out the door. Things are now matching up. So what do you do now? I mean, your job isn't over. I mean, basically, once you fixed all that data up, the public is out there moving around behind you. Back in the beginnings, our company did a lot of rural address conversion projects as counties went from basic 911 to enhanced 911. And one of the things that, basically as we're driving down the road collecting GPS for addresses, people are building new homes, et cetera, behind us and adding more addresses. So the fact that you've got all the data as it's sat in this snapshot of time, you've gotten it all fixed up, everything's at a 98% match rate, it by no means that you are complete and done. You now need to enter the maintain phase because you want to keep this data at this high level going forward so that that stress, that feeling of darkness, hey, we can't get these calls to locate that stuff, you don't want that to come back. So maintaining your data. In order to maintain this stress-free lifestyle, you'll need to maintain that data while still processing daily updates, changes. Lives depend on it. We all know that. Have a communication plan with your staff or vendor partner. Once you get this big project done, you've got the data cleaned up, basically say to them, let's resync. Let's do this on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis. Let's have a regular plan. Let's have a workflow. On the first of every month, I'm going to reach out. You're going to provide me a cut of the latest data. We're going to get it in our CAD system. Have a plan and a workflow of what you're going to do, how you're going to keep the latest and greatest data in your system. I can't tell you how many times we have actually gone out and talked to a customer and they said, yeah, we put this GIS data, we put this in our system 10 years ago, and I don't think anybody's touched it since then. That is not the right answer. That's not the best practice to use. So you need to keep this data fresh, monthly, quarterly, etc. Local workflow. And again, this is just a simple example of what your workflow. And again, it does not hurt to have this on paper. Have this thing whiteboarded out. Here's the process. Our local 911 authorities are contributing data, city addressing authorities, others, we're all contributing data. Our maintenance team is putting this together. They're doing these regular synchronization comparisons between the MSAG and the alley and the map. And then last, we're pushing that stuff off into our 911 CAD mapping. It does not hurt to have this documented and on paper somewhere so that everybody knows here's the process we're following. Workflows, required tasks assigned personnel. So that previous diagram showed you the tasks, but you also want to tie people to those tasks. What department is in charge of maintaining this? Who works on this stuff? Maybe in your county GIS department, there's 4 staff people. Maybe one of them is the 911 person, the one that really has an interest and they work on 911 and maybe that's all they work on. So again, assign some folks to this so that you have some responsibility and some sense of knowing who is working on this and who's your partner. State and regional workflows. So again, I talked about, you're not an island, you're not, you've got the concept of the greater good. there's other folks are contributing as well. So especially when we get to a next gen 911 environment where you're maybe sharing data up into a regional system for call routing or a statewide system, the whole little workflow that you had for your jurisdiction now gets much bigger, includes a lot of other folks, a lot of other jurisdictions, and your data is basically being pushed out to your mapping as well as your call routing, et cetera. So the process is going to get probably more intricate than it is today at your local level in the future. Again, the stress-free strategy: assess, improve, maintain. What's the cause of your stress and anxiety? Improve the data, rally your troops, get those folks that have the resources, that have the capabilities to fix things up, get them involved, and maintain. Don't let things get out of hand again. And then complete and repeat this process. This isn't as I noted, this isn't a one-time, hey, we're done, we're good. This is something you have to continue to do monthly, quarterly, however often your jurisdiction needs, depending on the amount of change and updates that you have going on. Thank you very much for your time today. My contact info is here. We have a whole host of information on our website that talks about things we talked about today, as well as a host of other resources that just talk in general fashion about GIS data, updates, etc. Again, thank you for your time. Goodbye.